This video continues our discussion of the article Livestock and Climate Change, written by Robert Goodland and Jeff Anhang. Goodland and Anhang raise 5 points, 5 additional sources of greenhouse gas emissions from livestock not considered in the FAO's report Livestock's Long Shadow, which came out in 2006, and to which Livestock and Climate Change is addressed as a response. In the previous 2 videos, we looked at the first 3 points raised by livestock and climate change: respiration from livestock, land use, and undercounted methane. Just these 3 points alone have more than tripled the amount of greenhouse gas emissions that should be attributed to livestock agriculture. But Goodland and Anhang still aren't done, and in this video we're going to consider points 4 and 5. Points 4 and 5 don't really offer any new concepts concerning our ideas about global warming. We saw that points 1 and 2 actually did involve changing our ideas of what the natural carbon cycle was by showing that some elements of this supposedly natural cycle actually have been substantially altered by humans, and not just by an insignificant degree either. And we need to take account of these alterations. Point number 3 concerns methane, and it involves the question of how much time we've got before we're pushed past critical tipping points. Point 4 is more mundane. It's essentially a grab bag of miscellaneous items that, again, the FAO just somehow didn't count. First of all, livestock has increased since 2002. Livestock's Long Shadow was published in 2006, and Livestock and Climate Change was published in 2009. Well, obviously, cattle have increased between 2002 and 2006, and again between 2006 and 2009. If we're going to account for these, we have to allow that the number of livestock have increased, and this is obviously going to increase the total amount of greenhouse gas emissions. The FAO apparently just stopped counting livestock in 2002. A lot of the calculations here likely involved taking the number of cows, pigs, and chickens that we've got in the world and then figuring the greenhouse gas emissions per each cow, each pig, or each chicken, and then multiplying by the total number of livestock. Obviously, if you underestimate the total amount of livestock, you're going to come up with a lower figure for greenhouse gas emissions. And this is essentially what the FAO did. In some cases, the FAO had much better data in its possession. It's like the left hand and the right hand of the FAO weren't talking to each other. And if they had been aware of this other data, they would have had a more accurate result. In other cases, the FAO was just using out-of-date data. Sometimes this data was decades old, and obviously greenhouse gas emissions would be much higher if you considered the more up-to-date data. And finally, they made the livestock industry look good by considering Minnesota, livestock agriculture in Minnesota, to be the standard for all livestock agriculture throughout the world. They took the efficiency of Minnesota livestock agriculture and then assumed that livestock agriculture in China, in South America, and in Texas was all that same level of efficiency. Well, obviously this is going to bias the data in favor of the livestock industry because livestock agriculture in Minnesota is relatively more efficient. So, when you add all of these items up, you've got another 5.56 gigatons of CO2 equivalents. Then we turn to point 5, which is the misallocated greenhouse gas emissions. The difference between point 5 and point 4, they're both miscellaneous collections of things the FAO didn't count, except that in point number 5, the FAO actually did count them and did have an estimate for these greenhouse gas emissions, but somehow classified them as not from livestock agriculture. For example, deforestation in Argentina and elsewhere. This deforestation occurred in order to facilitate livestock agriculture, but somehow it was not considered to be part of livestock agriculture. Furthermore, fish farming was considered to be somehow not part of livestock agriculture. And industries processing livestock feed were also considered not to be part of livestock agriculture. Do I need to say this? Do we need to have a scientific debate over whether industries processing livestock feed are part of livestock agriculture, or whether deforestation to create land for livestock is part of livestock agriculture, or whether fish are animals and whether fish farming should be considered part of livestock agriculture? This is ridiculous. There's no excuse for this, and so we can add another at least 3 gigatons of CO2 equivalents to the total for livestock agriculture. So what do we make of points 4 and 5? First of all, please note that these points just by themselves, which are essentially accounting issues, would more than double the total greenhouse gas emissions attributed to livestock agriculture. Even if we forget about land use, even if we forget about respiration from livestock, even if we forget about the undercounted methane, you'd still raise the total greenhouse gas emissions that should be attributed to livestock agriculture from about 7.5 gigatons of CO2 equivalents to over 16 gigatons of CO2 equivalents. This screams out for an explanation. Is this just carelessness, or is it ignorance, or is it political manipulation? We can get a good idea of what's going on if we look at what the FAO's response to livestock and climate change was. They then announced a partnership with the International Meat Secretariat and the International Dairy Federation. They now assume that livestock agriculture is going to double between 1999 and 2050. Recall, by the way, that livestock agriculture, livestock production has already quadrupled up to the present day since 1961. And now they want to double it again between 1999 and 2050. Furthermore, they think that they're going to promote factory farming because factory farming is more efficient. So what they're going to do throughout the world is actually promote more factory farming, more intensive livestock operations. And it goes downhill from there. You might think, for example, that they might admit that, oh well, maybe fish farming really is part of livestock agriculture, or perhaps all this land that was deforested to create land for livestock is also part of livestock agriculture, and they might make some changes to their accounting procedures. But no, the FAO has doubled down on livestock agriculture. They revised their total all right, but they revised it in the other direction. Instead of 18% of all greenhouse gas emissions due to livestock agriculture, they now said that it was 14.5%. They actually revised the accounting downward. It's fairly obvious that, as Robert Goodland wrote in 2012 in the New York Times, that the FAO has caved to meet industry pressure. Now, to be fair, the authors of the FAO report, Livestock's Long Shadow, did respond to livestock and climate change in a scientific forum. There was an exchange of views in the journal Animal Feed Science and Technology, which appeared in 2011. The title of this piece was Livestock and Greenhouse Gas Emissions, the Importance of Getting the Numbers Right. The response from Goodland and Anhang came in March 2012. They published a response in this journal. They essentially destroyed the FAO's arguments. Anyone who wants to seriously consider the scientific question of this article really should look at these two essays. Look at the FAO's response and then look at Goodland and Anhang's rebuttal to that. And you can see also that the FAO made no further attempt in a scientific forum to engage the authors of Livestock and Climate Change. Since the livestock industry has failed to answer their arguments in a scientific forum, they decided on a different tactic. After Robert Goodland's death in 2013, they launched a public relations campaign to convince environmentalists and others that there was a scientific consensus, that the FAO was right after all, and that we could ignore all of this stuff from livestock and climate change. Of course, no such consensus exists. Nature does not accommodate public opinion, it does not accommodate media campaigns, and it is not susceptible to political pressure. Livestock agriculture has devastated the planet, and we have to acknowledge that if we're ever going to make any significant progress on dealing with global warming.